The first time my name was said out loud that morning, it wasn't followed by a question. It was followed by silence. "This is an issue of individual accountability," the chief executive officer said, his voice calm, practiced. "We cannot afford failures at that level." I was sitting 3 chairs from the end of the table, notebook open, pen uncapped, still waiting for someone to ask me to explain. Instead, every head turned toward me at once, not aggressively, not angrily, just long enough to make the message clear. I leaned forward. "If you're referring to the authentication failure," I flagged. "That won't be necessary," he interrupted. "We're focused on resolution, not hindsight." Across the table, the head of legal avoided my eyes. My direct manager stared at the wood grain like it might give him instructions. No one said my name again. They didn't have to. A woman from Human Resources cleared her throat. "Nayla, if you'll step outside with me for a moment." I didn't argue. I followed her into the smaller room next door. She placed a folder on the table between us and slid it forward with both hands. "This is effective immediately," she said. "You'll receive severance consistent with company policy." I opened the folder. Termination letter, exit checklist. At the bottom, in heavier print than the rest, a line I hadn't expected: "Do not rehire." I looked up. "That's not standard." She nodded, already rehearsed. It was a leadership decision based on the need to move forward. I closed the folder. My hands were steady. I was proud of that. "Where do I return my badge?" She blinked, surprised by the lack of protest. "Security will escort you, back in the hallway." The door to the boardroom stayed shut. Voices continued without me. I handed over my badge, my laptop, my access card. No one asked what I had warned them about. No one asked when. I walked out of the building without saying a word. 6 weeks earlier, I had sent my first email about the vulnerability that started all of this, and they had read every single one. The story you're about to hear is a fictional work created by the writing team at Her Revenge. While the events, characters, and company names are imagined, the emotional truths behind this story are drawn from real patterns seen in modern workplaces, where warnings are ignored, accountability is deflected, and silence is often mistaken for weakness. This story exists to explore what happens when records remain, even after voices are dismissed. I didn't know yet how much those unread replies would cost them. I only knew that by the time they realized what they had done, I would no longer be there to explain it. 6 weeks earlier, I was still allowed to believe the system worked. I stood in my manager's doorway with my laptop open. "I found something in the authentication refresh flow," I said. "It's subtle, but it's real." He didn't look up. "Does it pass the current security framework?" "It doesn't fit the framework," I replied. "That's the problem." He finally met my eyes. "Then document it and send it through the proper channel." I did exactly that. My first email was careful, no alarmist language, no assumptions. I wrote, "Potential vulnerability observed during token refresh cycle. Requesting review." I attached logs. I attached analysis. I sent it. 2 days later, I sent another. Shorter this time, just following up. By the end of the second week, I added my manager and the director. "This needs review before the next release." My manager stopped by my desk. "You've made your point. I don't think anyone's read it yet." "They've read it," he said. "Trust me." That night, I checked the email metadata. Read receipts. Multiple, executives, legal, security leadership. No replies. I escalated through compliance, exactly as policy required. "This may represent a material risk if exploited," I wrote, choosing every word like it could be used against me later. The next morning, an email arrived. Not from the chief executive officer, not from the director. It was from his assistant. "Thank you for raising your concern," it read. "Leadership has reviewed the matter and aligned with management's assessment. No further action is required at this time." I stared at the screen. Aligned meant discussed. Reviewed meant understood. No action meant chosen. My manager leaned over my chair. "See, it was handled." "Handled doesn't mean fixed," I said quietly. He lowered his voice. "You're starting to sound obsessive." By the 4th week, people stopped responding altogether. Conversations ended when I approached. Meetings moved forward without me. I sent one last message. Careful not to sound emotional. Careful not to sound urgent. It was opened within minutes. It was never answered. That was when I understood the silence wasn't neglect. It was a decision. The meeting invite came from my manager, then expanded to include compliance and human resources. That was when I knew this was no longer about the vulnerability. "We've reviewed your emails," my manager said, folding his hands like this was a performance review. "Your concern is theoretical, it's reproducible," I replied. I included the steps. "The framework doesn't flag it," he said. "We rely on standards for a reason." I turned to the compliance lead, a man I had worked beside for years. "The framework assumes a different token lifecycle. This bypasses it." He didn't disagree. He just shrugged. "If it's not mapped, it's not actionable, so we ignore it," I said. "We document it," my manager corrected, "and we move on." Human Resources spoke next, her voice smooth. "We've noticed a pattern in how you communicate these concerns." "A pattern of warnings?" I asked. "A tone," she said. "Persistent, insistent. I'm doing my job. No one's questioning your intent," she replied. "But escalation can feel disruptive when leadership has already aligned." Aligned. That word again. My manager leaned back. "You're a strong analyst, Nyla. But you're not responsible for strategic decisions. Stay in your lane." "My lane includes risk," I said, "especially when it affects customers." He smiled tightly. "Your lane includes execution. Strategy happens above you." I felt the shift then. Not anger, calculation, I asked. "Do you want me to stop documenting?" This compliance answered instead. "Continue documenting, just internally. An escalation is no longer necessary." Human Resources closed her notebook. "We want you to succeed here, but perception matters. You don't want to be seen as difficult." The meeting ended without a decision, which was its own kind of decision. Back at my desk, I opened the compliance manual. Every rule I had followed was there in plain language. Escalation paths, reporting obligations, audit trails. The system was intact. It just wasn't designed to protect the people it claimed to serve. I wrote the email at least 6 times before I sent it. The first version sounded angry. I deleted it. The second sounded afraid. I deleted that too. By the fourth, my hands were shaking enough that I had to stop typing. "This isn't how people keep their jobs," I muttered to myself, staring at the screen. My manager passed by my desk. "Still on that?" he asked, not slowing down. "I'm finishing something," I said. He stopped this time. "You've already escalated. I'm clarifying risk." He lowered his voice. "You're drawing attention to yourself." After he walked away, I opened the draft again. I stripped out adjectives. I stripped out urgency. What was left felt almost cold. This vulnerability allows session tokens to be intercepted during refresh under specific conditions. Impact includes unauthorized access to customer accounts. Risk increases with scale. I hovered over the send button. If this went wrong, there would be no arguing later that I had followed instructions. This email would be proof that I hadn't stayed quiet when it mattered. It would also be proof that I hadn't known when to stop. I added one last line. "I am requesting confirmation that leadership has reviewed this assessment." Then I attached everything: logs, timelines, replication steps, every version number written out in plain language. I sent it. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Not a reply. A calendar notification. Executive security briefing added attachment. I refreshed my inbox. Nothing. An hour passed. Then 2. By the end of the day, my manager sent a single message. Noted. I replied. "Has it been reviewed?" He didn't answer. The next morning, compliance stopped by my desk. "You're thorough," he said carefully. "Just be mindful of how much noise you make." Later that afternoon, an automated system alert confirmed the attachment had been opened. Multiple times. No comments, no follow-up, no decision. I closed my laptop and sat there longer than I meant to. The email existed now. The record was complete. Whatever happened next would no longer be accidental. The first alert didn't sound dramatic. It never does. "Can you take a look at the authentication logs?" a junior analyst asked over chat. "Something feels off," I replied. "What kind of off volume?" He said, "Refresh requests are higher than normal." I pulled the data. My stomach tightened. "How long has this been happening?" "Since early this morning," he said. "Maybe earlier. We're still pulling historicals." By noon, the room felt different. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. People stopped joking. Screens filled with dashboards no one wanted to explain. A director walked past my desk and said into his phone, No, don't loop her in yet. I stood up. Loop me into what? He paused, then forced a smile. We're investigating an anomaly. It's an exploit, I said. It's already moving. He didn't answer. He just kept walking. An hour later, a message went out to leadership channels. Potential customer impact identified. Containment in progress. Potential. I stared at the word. A customer support manager stopped by, voice low. We're getting calls, accounts with unauthorized activity. How many, I asked. She swallowed. More than we're comfortable with. By mid-afternoon, conference rooms filled and doors closed. Executives moved fast, speaking in short bursts. Legal joined. Public relations joined. Security leadership stopped sharing screens. I pulled early system data before access tightened. The pattern was unmistakable. The exploit hadn't appeared out of nowhere. There were traces from days earlier. Subtle spikes, missed alerts. Exactly the kind of signals that disappear when no one is looking for them. My manager finally came to my desk. Don't speculate, he said. We'll handle this. I sent you this scenario weeks ago, he exhaled sharply. Now is not the time. When is, I asked? He didn't answer. That evening, an internal message went out instructing staff not to discuss the incident. External communications would be centralized. Leadership would address questions. I watched the live metrics climb and felt two things at once. Relief that I hadn't imagined the risk, and dread, because I knew what came next would have nothing to do with fixing it. The emergency meetings blurred together, but the language stayed the same. We're dealing with a process failure, the chief executive officer said. Hands folded. Voice steady. Not a systemic one. No one asked what the difference was. Legal spoke next. We need to be precise in how we describe responsibility. Words matter. My manager nodded too quickly. There were gaps in oversight. I said. I escalated those gaps. The chief executive officer didn't look at me. This isn't about revisiting emails, he said. It's about restoring confidence. Confidence, not customers, not data. Human Resources joined the call a few minutes later. Her tone was gentle, almost apologetic. Given the circumstances, leadership has decided to move forward with a small organizational adjustment. I knew what was coming before she said my name. Naila, she continued. Your role is being eliminated effective immediately. Eliminated, I repeated. It's not disciplinary, she said quickly. It's restructuring. I looked at my manager. You told me to document everything. He shifted in his chair. This isn't personal. It never is, I said. The chief executive officer finally spoke again. We appreciate your contributions, but accountability has to land somewhere. He still didn't say my name, publicly. The company released a statement about limited impact and swift containment. Internally, access permissions changed overnight. Reports were locked. Conversations moved to smaller rooms. I was escorted to a separate call with Human Resources. No raised voices, no accusations, just paperwork. Severance is standard, she said. 2 months, and the rehire status. She hesitated, then slid the document forward. Leadership requested an exception. I read the line again. Do not rehire. Based on what I asked, she met my eyes for the first time. Based on alignment, I signed, not because I agreed, but because refusing wouldn't change the outcome. When the call ended, my system access vanished. My calendar emptied. Messages stopped arriving, somewhere upstairs. They were deciding what version of the story would survive, and they had already decided where the blame would rest. Clearing my desk took less time than I expected. A security guard stood a few steps back, pretending to check his phone. My manager hovered near the aisle, hands in his pockets, watching without speaking. I'll need written confirmation of my handover, I said, sliding my badge into an envelope. Assets, credentials, ongoing reports. He blinked. That won't be necessary. It will, I replied. For my records. He hesitated, then nodded. I'll have someone send it. Human Resources met me near the elevators with a final packet. Just signatures, she said. Standard procedure. I scanned the pages. Non-disclosure, exit acknowledgement, confirmation that all company property had been returned. I'd like a copy, I said, of course. I signed where indicated. My name looked steadier than I felt. She glanced up. You don't have any questions. No statements you'd like to make, I shook my head. Back at my desk, I shut down my laptop for the last time. A colleague passed by and slowed. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I nodded. Take care of the customers. He looked away, at the security desk. The guard took my access card. Good luck, he said, like it was a reflex. Thank you. Outside, my phone buzzed once. An automated message confirming my exit time. No personal notes. No follow-ups. Later that afternoon, an email arrived from compliance. Handover documentation attached. I replied with a single line. Received? That was all I said. What they didn't see was me forwarding every confirmation to my personal archive. Every timestamp, every acknowledgement, every locked report. My silence wasn't agreement. It wasn't acceptance. It was restraint. And as I walked away from the building, I let them believe what they needed to believe. 2 days after I left, the company released its public statement. Limited exposure, the spokesperson said on camera. No evidence of systemic failure. Customer funds remain secure. I watched the clip on my phone while making coffee. The phrasing was careful. So careful it almost worked. By the end of the week, it didn't. A reporter from a Chicago business journal emailed me directly. We're reviewing internal correspondence related to the breach, she wrote. Your name appears multiple times. Would you be willing to confirm the timeline? I didn't respond, and I didn't need to. Another article followed, then another. Headlines shifted from unexpected incident to warnings ignored. Screenshots appeared, redacted, but recognizable. Dates, subject lines. Phrases I had written at midnight, trying not to sound alarmist. Inside the company, the tone changed. A former colleague called me from a blocked number. They're asking everyone for emails now, he said. Legal is panicking. The next morning, a regulatory notice leaked. Request for documentation regarding internal risk disclosures and response protocols. Board members joined emergency calls they had skipped the week before. This wasn't disclosed. One of them said, according to a transcript that found its way to the press, it was assessed. The chief executive officer replied, assessed by whom silence followed. Not the thoughtful kind, the dangerous kind. Public relations tried to reframe again. Miscommunication, they said. Breakdown in process. But journalists didn't repeat it this time. What unraveled them wasn't the breach itself. It was the evidence that they had known, that they had chosen not to act, that they had chosen later to rewrite the story. An internal memo surfaced, then disappeared. Another appeared somewhere else. By the time the board announced an independent review, the narrative was no longer theirs to control. I closed the articles one by one. The system they trusted to protect them had finally done its job, just not in the way they expected. The investigation didn't begin with handcuffs. It began with calendars, requests for interviews, requests for documents, requests for timelines that no longer matched the public statements. An independent firm was named, one with no prior ties to the company. That detail mattered more than people realized. A former director called me late one evening. They're reconstructing everything, he said. Every warning, every meeting. They should, I replied. They found your emails, I know. They're not asking whether leadership knew, he said. They're asking when the chief executive officer appeared before regulators the following week. Not in a courtroom, in a conference room filled with screens and recorders. An investor asked, were you aware of internal risk disclosures prior to the incident? He paused. I was informed of potential concerns you dismissed, the investigator said. I relied on my team's assessment. Another pause, this one longer. So you were informed, she said, and chose not to act. The transcript circulated quietly at first, then not so quietly. The board moved next. Emergency sessions, closed votes, carefully worded announcements, leadership transition. The statement read. A colleague messaged me a screenshot. The chief executive officer's biography had vanished from the company website. So had 2 senior managers. No explanation, no farewell note. There was no dramatic collapse, no flashing headlines about arrests. Just doors closing that would never open again. Consulting contracts disappeared. Speaking invitations were withdrawn. Search results filled in the gaps. A recruiter reached out to me that same week. We're familiar with what happened, she said. We'd like to talk. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt settled. What had been taken from me wasn't returned. It was replaced by something quieter. Validation without applause. Consequences without cruelty. The company still existed. The systems were being rebuilt, but the people who had decided silence was safer than action were gone from the rooms that mattered. And they would not be invited back in. 3 months after everything went quiet, my phone rang during lunch. "This is Marin Collins," the woman said. "I lead security oversight at a firm you know well. We'd like to speak with you." I didn't answer right away. She continued. "We're not calling to ask what happened. We already know that. We want to hear how you documented it." We met a week later. No glass offices, no rehearsed apologies. Just a long table and direct questions. "Did you escalate?" one of them asked. "Yes." "Did you receive confirmation?" "Yes." "And when you were dismissed, I requested written handover confirmation." Marin nodded. "That's why we're here." They didn't offer sympathy. They didn't criticize my former employer. They talked about systems, records, accountability that survived turnover. At the end of the meeting, Marin said, "We'd like you to help us build something quieter, something that remembers." I accepted. News traveled slowly after that. The former chief executive officer never announced a resignation. He simply stopped appearing. His name faded from advisory boards. Invitations dried up. Search results filled in the blanks he left behind. A former colleague messaged me one evening. "He's done," she wrote. "No lawsuits, no speeches, just gone." I read it, then put my phone down. I didn't feel relief. I felt resolved. I learned that silence can be powerful when it's paired with records. That professionalism outlasts authority. That truth doesn't need volume when it's preserved carefully. The lesson I carry forward is simple and permanent when your voice is ignored. Document anyway. When you are pushed aside, stay precise. Power can rewrite a moment, but it cannot erase a timeline. In the end, what protected me was not influence or revenge. It was clarity. And clarity, once written down, does not forget.